Test. Okay. Folks in the audience could take your seat. We're going to get started in just a minute here. For folks participating online, we're going to get started in about 1 minute. All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started here. My name is Hank Brady. I'm the implementation manager for CalRecycle for the implementation of SB 1383. I'm going to start with a couple housekeeping things for fire, life, and safety announcement. In the event of an alarm or an emergency, please follow the CalRecycle staff up here at the dais out to out the door, down the stairs, and out into the park across the street. Looks like we'll have about a 1-to-1 CalRecycle staff to audience ratio, so you can have a personal escort today. A couple things, just a reminder for folks before we get started. When we do get to the public comment period, if you can clearly articulate your name and affiliation, we do have this. We have a court reporter recording this so that we can have comments submitted into the record. And if you do have a card or a business card, if you can provide that to our court reporter, who's right over here on the right side of the room, or my right, your left, that'll help us facilitate the public record for the comments. So I'm going to start by going over the hearing logistics for today and the agenda. I'm going to start with an overview of the organic waste reduction requirements of SB 1383 to provide some context for the environmental impact report. That'll provide an overview of some of the reasonably foreseeable compliance responses that were analyzed in the environmental impact report, and an overview of the benefits analyzed in the environmental impact report. Nanette Hansel with Ascent Environmental, who helped prepare the environmental impact report, will go over some of the specifics of the environmental analysis and the findings there. And then we'll open it up for public comment. For people participating online, you should be able to see at the bottom of the screen that you can submit comments to slcp.organics@calrecycle.ca.gov. That email address will be up again at the end of the presentation so that you can have that online. We will be reading comments that are submitted online, dependent on the length of those comments. We may paraphrase, but if you submit your comment online, it will be entered into the record in its entirety and receive a response. And one other thing to clarify on this is that our purpose today is really to receive and record comments. We may respond to clarifying questions, but mostly we're here to be available to receive and accept public comments so those can be entered into the record. Okay, so diving in on the organic waste stream and some of the requirements of SB 1383. Organic waste is the largest waste stream in California. It's roughly responsible for about 2/3 of our waste stream. We've recently revised our disposal projections based on new disposal reporting data, which I'll talk about in a couple slides, but we are currently projecting that in 2017, based on our per capita disposal numbers, and the waste characterization breakdown, about 27 million tons of organic waste was disposed in 2017, which is an increase from the amount that was disposed in 2014. Food waste comprises the single largest portion of organic waste that's disposed, and it's the single largest portion of any waste stream that's disposed. Paper comprises another portion of our organic waste stream, followed by lumber and a category of miscellaneous other organic waste. And about 1/3 of our waste stream is not organic waste. Also in California, as we note that about 20% or 18% of our waste stream is food waste. This is important to note that 1 in 8 Californians and about 1 in 5 children are currently suffering from food insecurity every day. And there are provisions and requirements in SB 1383 that direct us to take actions to help alleviate and address this issue. SB 1383 is a part of the state's overall climate change strategy. It includes specific requirements to reduce short-lived climate pollutants or super pollutants from various sectors of the economy. Specifically for the waste sector, it directs the department to adopt regulations to reduce organic waste by 2020 and by 2025, tied to 2014 levels. I'll talk about those specific targets in a minute. Part of the impetus for the short-lived climate pollutant strategy as part of the state's overall 2030 climate change strategy is to reduce some of the most significant global warming potential pollutants that are in the atmosphere, which can have a direct impact on climate change, a direct mitigating impact on climate change in our lifetime. Methane is produced when organic waste is disposed of in a landfill, and it's significantly more potent than CO2 as a climate pollutant. Has about 80 times the global warming potential as carbon dioxide. The SB 1383 requirements specifically direct the department to adopt regulations designed to reduce landfill disposal and organic waste by 50% from the 2014 level by 2020. That essentially requires the state to reduce landfill disposal to no more than 11.5 million tons by 2020. In 2022, the regulations that are the subject of this environmental impact report are allowed to take effect. By 2025, the state is supposed to dispose of no more than 5.7 million tons of organic waste annually, and that translates to a 75% reduction from the amount of organic waste that was disposed of in 2014. And as part of achieving the 75% reduction in landfill organic waste, our regulations that we've been directed to adopt are required to include actions to increase edible food recovery by 20% by 2025. Some of the reasonably foreseeable compliance responses that we projected in the environmental impact report are what I'm going to go over now. Before I talk about those, though, just want to talk about some of the baseline factors that impact the foreseeable compliance responses. The total amount that's anticipated to be disposed under business as usual conditions essentially establishes our baseline that we project how much material needs to be recovered from. I'll talk about those numbers in just a moment. The characterization or the type of organic waste that is disposed also has a significant impact on the foreseeable compliance responses. Essentially, certain materials are appropriate for certain pathways, but others are not. Paper is not going to go to food recovery. Food may go to compost, AD, and recovery, but it's not likely to go through traditional recycling pathways. The direct proposed regulatory requirements are also established some of the conditions that we're analyzing, and then the existing regulatory requirements, in addition to solid waste facility permits, regulatory conditions on the ground from air district requirements, as well as regional water quality requirements. For the reasonably foreseeable compliance responses, I'm going to note some of the highlighted actions that we're anticipating in the environmental impact report. I do want to note that many of these, if not all of these, are really a result of the statutory requirements. Any structure of the regulation would ultimately result in the same amount of material needing to be managed and the same amount of actions required throughout the state. First, with anaerobic digestion and compost, we're projecting anywhere from 108 compost facilities and 61 anaerobic digestion facilities that would be new or expanded. And those facilities are projected to manage about 45% of organic waste that's generated in 2025 and in 2030. And you can see on page 2-18 of the environmental impact report a projection of where those facilities could be located by air basin. We are projecting expanded throughput at chip and grind facilities across the state, roughly 10% of material going through chip and grind. Projecting new investments in new processing and collection infrastructure at transfer stations and MRFs, potential increase in operating hours, investment in new technology to improve processing capabilities, as well as potential revisions to existing collection systems. For example, biweekly collection of green waste may change to weekly collection of green waste and food waste in some jurisdictions, as well as garbage being a weekly could potentially shift to biweekly depending on the nature of the material. And then potential impacts with jurisdictions considering a shift to dual stream recycling to reduce contamination and increase recovery of material. We're projecting a modest increase in land application, around 2% across the state in the years that were analyzed. Minimal impacts relative to biomass conversion, less than 1% of material projected to go to these facilities, and no new facilities resulting from the regulation. With food waste, again, anticipating additional processing technology would be necessary at existing transfer stations and material recovery facilities. In food recovery, we're anticipating with actions required for the commercial sector, roughly 2% of all organic waste in the state would go towards food recovery, which would help achieve the 20% food recovery target. And then modest increases in source reduction and a modest amount of material going to emerging technologies, which we've provided for a pathway for in the regulation, as well as animal feed. I want to highlight before we move on to the environmental analysis some of the disposal projections and the business as usual projections, as well as the change in our projections from the previous economic analysis. So this table here highlights the amount that must be recovered in 2025 and 2030 under our projections of how much material will be disposed. You can see in the bottom row, we're projecting that in 2025, under business as usual circumstances, about 32.3 million tons would be disposed or would be generated, and of that, 26.8 million would need to be recovered through various pathways that we've projected in the analysis. And by 2030, that number increases to 33.6 million tons generated, with about 28 million tons that must be recovered through the various pathways. I want to talk about for a minute why some of our numbers and projections have changed for the environmental impact report from the previous economic assessment. The way we project disposal for SB 1383 is we take the Department of Finance population projections from 2019 through 2030, and we apply that to per capita disposal numbers. For the economic analysis, our previous target was tied to 2014 per capita disposal and applied to the 2017 DOF population projections. When we received the 2017 disposal reporting numbers, we saw a substantial increase in per capita disposal. 2014 numbers were about 4.3 or 4.4 pounds per person per day, and the 2017 numbers are about 5.2 pounds per day, per person per day, and that also constitutes the largest single year-over-year increase in per capita disposal since we started the recording system. To account for that increase, we've revised our projections to account for a longer period. We average per capita disposal from 2000 to 2017 to account for shifts in the economy, which is what we've seen as the economy goes up. Disposal goes up, as the economy goes down, disposal goes down. So with that averaging, we are projecting disposal now off of a baseline of 5.3 pounds per person per day and linking that to DOF's latest population projections. That ultimately has a significant increase in the amount of material that we're projecting to be disposed, and that has a corresponding increase in the amount of material that needs to be recovered. And as a result, as a separate note, we are taking a closer look and reanalyzing some of the economic impacts as a result of the revised projections. So quickly on the anticipated benefits of the proposed regulation, the most significant is the potential benefit to feeding hungry people that currently do not have sufficient access to adequate sources of food. Regulation is projected to result in 700,000 tons of food being recovered annually starting in 2030. Also, the regulations are projected to result in new soil amendments and new sources of renewable energy and renewable fuel that can be used across the state. Increases in employment across the state, health benefits stemming from increased air quality from material going out of landfills and into composting and into anaerobic digestion, as well as chip and grind. Benefits to California businesses, including revenues from new products such as compost and gas that are being sold across the state, as well as decreased disposal fees that are paid. And then improved soil health from the application of soil amendments and significantly reduced greenhouse gases, which is, of course, the ultimate purpose of the statute. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nanette to talk about the EIR findings and overview.
Good afternoon. Nanette Hansel with Cent Environmental. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'll spend the next few minutes reviewing some of the key EIR findings, as well as discussing the next steps in the environmental process. Starting with, why do we prepare an EIR? What's its purpose? An EIR is required for a project that may result in a significant impact on the environment. It's a disclosure document that informs decision makers and the public regarding any substantial adverse changes in the environment that would result from project implementation. For any significant impacts that are identified, an EIR must identify mitigation measures that would avoid or reduce the severity of those impacts. And finally, an EIR is also required to evaluate alternatives that would avoid or substantially lessen significant impacts of the project. The EIR is a full scope document. It addresses the resource topics listed here. It also looks at cumulative effects across these resources. The list of topics here was derived from the 2019 state CEQA guidelines. The EIR found that there would be 24 potentially significant and unavoidable impacts on the environment. This is across the 11 of the resource topics that we addressed. As explained in the introduction chapter of the EIR, specifically under subsection 1.2, the authority of CalRecycle and local enforcement agencies is statutorily limited. In this case, they do not have authority to require implementation of mitigation measures that would reduce potentially significant impacts of projects implemented in response to the proposed regulations. Rather, the authority to review the site-specific project-level impacts and require project-level mitigation lies primarily with local land use and/or permitting agencies for individual projects. Consequently, although it's reasonable to expect that the potentially significant and unavoidable impacts identified in the draft EIR and listed here would be reduced to a less than significant level by land use, local land use, and/or permitting agencies through their conditions of approval. However, the degree to which another agency would require mitigation is uncertain, and therefore, the EIR discloses for CEQA compliance purposes that the impacts resulting from the development of new facilities built in response to the proposed regulations could result in potentially significant and unavoidable impacts. Those impacts include, for aesthetics, the potential to degrade scenic resources related to construction and operation of new facilities, and the potential for new facilities to include sources of substantial light and glare. For agricultural and forestry resources, adverse impacts are related to the potential for the conversion or loss of farmlands or forest lands related to new facility development. For air quality, the impacts are related to short and long-term increases in criteria air pollutant emissions that could exceed local air district thresholds of significance. There's also a potential that there could be exposure of sensitive receptors to toxic air contaminant emissions as well as odors. For biological resources, the potential for adverse impacts is related to potential effects on special status species, riparian habitats, and wetlands. For cultural resources, the impact recognizes the potential for a substantial adverse change in the significance of built historic resources or disturbance of unique archaeological resources. Continuing on, for geology and soils, the impact includes the potential to destroy paleontological resources or fossils. For climate change, the impact includes potential to generate greenhouse gas emissions that exceed local thresholds of significance. For hazards and hazardous material, the impacts have to do with the potential to disturb known hazardous material sites, or the potential to create a safety hazard if a new facility was sited near an existing airport, or the potential to impair implementation of an emergency response or evacuation plan. For water quality, the impact pertains specifically to the land application of material and its potential to adversely affect water quality. For noise, short and long-term increases in the noise environment related to construction and operation of new facilities could have an adverse impact. And finally, for transportation, the impacts are related to construction-related traffic impacts, as well as a projected increase in statewide vehicle miles traveled. In addition to looking at resource impacts, the EIR evaluated a range of alternatives consistent with SEQRA requirements. The alternatives evaluated in detail include the standard no project alternative, which assumes that the proposed regulations would not be implemented. The EIR looked at an alternative that would limit the types of facilities, operations, and activities that process or use organic waste in a way that constitutes a reduction of landfill disposal. That's a mouthful. It's a long way of saying that with this alternative, Article 2 of the proposed regulations would exclude land application and other beneficial uses from the definition. The EIR looked at an alternative that would expand the list of targeted commercial edible food generators. With this alternative, Article 10 of the regulations, the list of targeted generators would be expanded with the intent of increasing the volume of edible food recovered, potentially reducing the overall food insecurity rate in California, and reducing the amount of waste, material that needed to be managed as waste. These alternatives are evaluated at a comparative level versus the proposed project and are included in Chapter 5 of the EIR. The schedule shows the steps in the environmental review process and opportunities for public input. We are at the step where we have released the draft EIR for a 45-day public review period, which will end on September 13th. The next step involves preparation of the final EIR, which will include written responses to comments that pertain to environmental issues, as well as changes to the draft text of the draft EIR. The plan is to release the final EIR on December 6th, and it's expected that CalRecycle's director will take action to consider certification of the EIR and project approval at the December 17th CalRecycle meeting. This concludes our presentation for today. Just a reminder, comments are due by September 13th. We will be recording oral comments as Hank indicated. If you are submitting comments in writing, please send them to Marcus at the address shown here. We have a special request for written comments. If you could submit them in Microsoft Word format, that will help us with achieving the state mandated accessibility requirements. Thank you again for the opportunity. I'll turn it back to you, Hank.
Thanks, Nanette. Okay, so it's about 1:25 right now. We're going to open it up to public comment for folks in the room, and then we'll turn to Marcus for comments that have been submitted online. For comments submitted online today, you can submit those just in the body of the email, and we'll read those aloud to the extent that they're in a length that can be read aloud. Otherwise, they'll be paraphrased, but your comment will be entered in its entirety into the record. Do want to reiterate that for comments today, the purpose of this hearing is for comments on the substance of the environmental analysis in the EIR, which there's 515 pages to comment on, so lots of fun stuff in there. But comments on the regulatory text are really more appropriate for the comment periods that we have for that during the rulemaking process. So you're certainly welcome to add that in as context, but the comments really should be focused on the environmental analysis. So with that, Dana has a microphone for folks that have comments. If you raise your hand, we'll get a microphone to you. And one reminder for folks that are commenting, please remember to identify your name and affiliation so that we can have that recorded properly.
Good afternoon. Evan Edgar, engineer for the California Compost Coalition. I was involved with the last program EIR for anaerobic digestion facilities. It was a robust process, highly beneficial. To this very day, I still use a program EIR for anaerobic digestion to permit those facilities locally, and it's a benefit to local government. And when we started this process out, I did submit comments on the notice of preparation, and we were talking about some type of stakeholder process where we had working groups to follow the program EIR did for anaerobic digestion, where we can work through some of these comments. This is the first one I'm aware of. I've been invited by the consultant or managers to talk about some of the metrics and science and calculations that we've developed on behalf of this program EIR. Is there another step along the way after all these comments coming from the draft EIR and before the final EIR goes on and that schedule? Will there be a specific stakeholder meeting to talk about the comments in the sense of the science, the math, the metrics, in order to show the net benefit analysis? One of the comments I provided during the notice of preparation that you're supposed to find a summary of benefits. What I heard here today was a bunch of mitigation and impacts. And as a whole, this program EIR, as you know, has a net benefit on both greenhouse gases, criteria pollutants, sequestering carbon, and I didn't see much of that within what I saw in the draft EIR. I have metrics and math in my comment letters that weren't considered, so I'm looking forward to the next sit-down stakeholder meeting where you can go through the process prior to the final EIR. Will there be such a meeting for that type of stakeholder workshop?
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Evan. Right now, we do not have a specific process like that set up. However, when we get your comments, we'd be happy to sit down and meet with you and walk through those. A little bit of a difference between the anaerobic digestion EIR and this process is we are fairly time limited and constrained by the time frame for the administrative law rulemaking process, and didn't feel like we had enough time available to do that process, to do a process like that outside of the mandatory public process. But we'd be happy to sit down with you when we get your comment letter and go through that and see where there's areas we can work on the EIR.
And that would be great, because that was a commitment I thought I heard in the notice of preparation was to do that. I was hoping it was occur by now, and we have the time to prepare the comments, and we have the time to sit down with you. So make yourself available, and we'll walk through the math.
Other questions or comments from the audience?
If there's nothing online, I have more comments, but I was going to go through the process step by step here with everybody participating.
Yeah, please, if other comments, go ahead. If other people have comments, please do raise your hand. Otherwise, the mic is yours.
Under the cumulative benefits analysis, you have different aspects of no project, and you have a kind of like a relative rating schedule on a chart back here. And there's so much metrics available that you guys should do, like the baseline. Any CEQA process always have a baseline. So if all this organics are baselined and put in landfill, we kind of know what the VOCs are. We know the greenhouse gases are. That's a known. And to have a project alternative, that should be explicit. And especially with the cumulative impact statement in the back, when you go through alternative analysis on table 5-1, it talks about less than avoidable, similar, and less. And all these alternatives have true metrics. I did the math. You guys have presented a scenario. Well, I understand on a project level, within a community of a county or a city, their project level impacts, but this is a program EIR, not a project EIR. And as part of the program EIR, there's aggregate numbers of net benefits above baseline. Now, on table 5-1, that table should have what is baseline, alternative 1, no project, and other alternatives with actual metrics on the greenhouse gas benefits, the NOx reductions, the VOC reductions. Under agriculture, the benefits of sequestering carbon in agriculture. Under the greenhouse gas, that these facilities are net zero now, according to CARB. There's a whole series of information I provided with metrics to validate the program aspect of a scenario that you guys put together of 100 different facilities, whatever, and so many air districts. Each one of those scenarios have a different aspect of emissions in that air basin. So we took your numbers, ran with it, provided the NOx emissions, which you did include, the VOC emissions, which we did the math for you and presented it. That type of information should be in a program level EIR so that the net benefits can be expressed on both alternative, no alternative, and 2 and 3 alternatives. I have it in writing during my notes, and the NOP comments have that. I will submit again today, and probably submit again as part of the in Word document so you can easily accommodate these comments in writing.
Thanks, Evan. Other comments in the room? Any comments online?
Here it'll come sorry to walk in late. We didn't know about this meeting until about a couple hours ago. I'm basically arguing the same points I made from before, with a little more authority, maybe. I don't think the statute allows you to give people the right to set up a single bin collection system and then expecting the waste hauler to pull out all of the goodies that are necessary. I think the statute is more restrictive than that. I think the fact that the board has not yet figured out what comparable to source separation means is a heavy deterrent to the legal effectiveness of your position on the regulations. And I hope very much to find attorneys who will agree with me and be willing to argue this case. As you know, we've been involved in a lawsuit in Alameda County against a mixed waste processing facility. My lawyer friend said her favorite statement to herself when she starts a new case or ends a new case, a new area of law to her is, I wish I knew what I know now when I started this. And we feel very much that way. The thing that's most impressive to me in all of this is what's been going on in Europe in the past 4 or 5 years. I hope that you all are paying attention to that because I think it's very much a bellwether of what can happen or should happen in the United States, which is that in about a year ago, the European Union said for the first time, effective in 2024, all organics collected in the European Union, that's 560 million people, 26 different countries, all of that material will be source separated. Okay? We are heading off in a different direction by allowing mixed waste processing to continue. And the Europeans have tried this for years. What they've come up with is contaminated compost. They've come up with all kinds of problems with the end product material. Compost like, I forgot what the CLO, it's a sort of a buzzword type thing. But I think if you really understood what was going on in Europe, you would say, in California, do we have to spend 20 years marching through the same steps that they did in order to recognize that organics, you can't mix organics and other materials and expect to be able to pull them out again. It just doesn't work. Now, maybe someday some bright, smart guy or gal will figure that out, but they haven't happened yet. And so, in our opinion, I think part of what you're doing is going down the wrong path. That's all. And Tony Stein is parking her car and will be along in a minute. But I think that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Art. And could you reiterate for our court reporter name and affiliation?
One more time.
Could you please reiterate for our court reporter name and affiliation? Because we're recording all comments. I'm not just...
Say your name and affiliation.
What? Oh, my name and affiliation. My name is Arthur Boone, and I have a small business called the Center for Recycling Research, located in Berkeley. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments in the room? Sure.
One of the very interesting statistics that's come up recently that I think has not been, I didn't look at it correctly myself. In 2007, Alameda County did a study to determine how many of their garbage containers had materials that really belonged to the recycling bin. And what they found is that 65% of the bins that were garbage bins that were surveyed had recyclable materials in them. They did the same study in 2017, and they found that only 35% of the bins had recyclable materials in them. And what that is, essentially, is the public catching on to the idea that these things that we were putting in the garbage don't belong in the garbage. I've been living in a multi-unit building in Alameda for the last year, helping a friend who's somewhat disabled. And I have been amazed at the 12-unit building that we live in. We are the only family in the complex that understands what organic recycling is, organic diversion. And the reason the city doesn't do anything, that nobody's banging on us, the hauler doesn't look in the garbage can and see all these organics and says, I can't pick this up. I've seen people do that, but not in that situation. So I think we have a real, in the cities where this is supposedly important, there's a real enforcement problem. And I think that's, to me personally, I think that's local elected officials are basically not willing to tackle the hard parts of this. Think about the laws. It's really fun to read. Just one more minute. I won't bore you about this. If you read, the Chronicle has on Sundays they have a series of articles that what was in the news 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago. If you ever see that. Recently, they printed the comments that were out when the idea of banning smoking in restaurants was first published. And it was really amazing. The tourists are going to stop coming to San Francisco because they can't smoke in their restaurants. I mean, stuff like that. And, this is going to kill my business. My bar will die, blah, blah, blah. And, it's a ho-hum event now. Is that correct? And I believe that the future of recycling and the future of organic conversion of organics to usable materials is a similar kind of it's a ho-hum. It will be looked at as a ho-hum 20 years from now. Thank you.
Thanks, and we'll go to Evan. And I do want to just remind folks, if your comments today can be specific to the substance of the environmental analysis in the EIR, that's what we're trying to record comments on so we can respond to that.
Evan Edgar, engineer for the California Compost Coalition, specifically section 3.14, utilities and service systems, under the impact to public utilities. This is a mandated program where there'll be over 100 facilities. So this is an essential public service. As you know from the other reports from California Air Pollution Control Officers Association, there's 35 different air districts where 21 of those have designated compost facilities as an essential public service, as well as other types of public services are essential. So as part of my comments as a notice of preparation, I asked for a discussion about the impact on compost facilities. We're an essential public service with regards to providing a service for SB 1383, and based upon infrastructure study, we have infrastructure spread out throughout California, but all these new tons coming on the market will be an impact to essential public service. Based upon the paper by CAPCOA paper out composting in California, there should be a discussion. You have inside of the section here, you have talked about impacts on water supply and distribution, wastewater collection and treatment, and there's all types of discussion about that. But I think there's definitely an impact. There's a significant impact on compost facilities by not having enough of them, and compost is an essential public service. Those comments and that discussion should be part of this draft EIR.
Thanks, Evan. Other comments in the room? Okay. So seeing no other comments, we'll hold it open for a little bit. If there are no comments online, and we have someone coming that has comments, but once we have no comments, we'll hold it open for about 5 minutes and then close out. But another comment from Evan. And just a reminder for folks online, it should be on the slide, the slcp.organics@calrecycle.ca.gov if you want to submit comments during the hearing.
Evan Edgar, engineer for the California Compost Coalition. Under section 4.4.2, agriculture and forest resources, there was a finding there that it could result in considered contribution to a significant cumulative impact on agriculture. Now, I've been working on the other silo, the working lands, natural working lands, whereby compost application to irrigated cropland has a significant benefit to agriculture. I submitted vast comments over there whereby they are recognizing the greenhouse gas benefits of, I think it's 5 to 12 million metric tons per year by 2025 by increasing the use of compost on irrigated croplands and working lands. Now, inside of here, there's no discussion about compost use, whereas there's some emission reduction factors noticed in the greenhouse gas section. But when it comes to compost use on irrigated cropland, it looks like somehow composting is significantly impacting agriculture, and the opposite is the case. So it should be a discussion about the net benefits of compost use on agricultural land. You'll get those comments in writing, the same comments I provided in the past, and the comments I provided to the natural working lands process that going over at California CDFA.
Thanks. Other comments in the room? All right, we'll hold. Evan, do you have other comments?
Under the air quality section with regards to baseline and conditions, even within the many studies from CAPCOA to carbon emission reduction factors, the VOCs from composting is less than just around half of landfills. And therefore, it's being treated in this document as if we're a new source, such as air districts treat compost as a new source review. Whereas if you brought in baseline conditions, which is a requirement of CEQA to look at baseline, had this material gone to landfills, there's more VOCs going to landfills, about 1.9 times more VOCs are emitted from landfills than composting. So in air quality section, I think that should be, once again, highlighted, discussed with metrics. And within my comments I provided under the NOP, we actually did the math on using a scenario that CARB had and other scenarios with regards to 53 to 74 new facilities in all these different air districts. We actually submitted a white paper about the benefits, the net benefits of VOC reduction in each air districts. And on top of that, with regards to local air permitting, even with these net benefits, what would be the cost of emission reduction credits if we were to build them? And the cost to do that is vast. And I put down, in the paper I put down, it's going to be up to $54 million in offsets to build these facilities. But if we brought in the net benefit analysis from baseline, coupled with essential public services discussion we have in many of the air districts, the compost facilities would not need to pay these emission reduction factors. I realize CEQA is not an economic conclusion, but I think that you're not supposed to bring that in, but I do need to bring in net benefits of VOC reduction as well as essential public service in order to have composting in California.
Thanks, Evan. Other comments in the room?
Hi, thank you. My name's Antoinette Stein. I come here from Alameda County. I live in Berkeley, California. This is about, what I've read is that the SSO, source separated organics, green bin, source separated organics, are to be kept separate. That 17, I can't remember the number. It's not in front of me, so I really need to pull that number, but that's the text you have, is keep it separate. My question is, I'm seeing that it's ambiguous, and I wrote you that comment, and it's hard to understand that you have one line saying separate SSO, source separated, in which the community separates it into the green bin, which the truck comes and receives it, and then processes it into organic compost. My question is, why would you want to then go and combine it with non-source separated, mixed waste from the black bin, from the purple bin, from some other garbage, trash? That's my reading, is that you then move into other lines of 1383 that allow it to be mixed in. And my question is, right now, I have a PhD in environmental engineering. I've worked my career as an engineer, and I worked for 3 years at the Department of Public Health, and for 5 more years for DGS in environmentally preferable purchasing. My question is, it's known 25% of the California population today smokes. We did our best at the Department of Public Health to reduce the smoking. We've done well, we've improved, but I'm sorry to say, when people smoke, they throw their butts and their ashes and all of that into the garbage can. That then gets mixed in with, if the people put organics in there. And then you're wanting to mix that mush that has, right now, we know, if you go and you look at the sewage, half of what is smoked ends up into the garbage, and the other half ends up into the toilet or into the sewer through the incinerators. And we know today, PFAS, fluorinated compounds that are contaminants and disastrously make people ill, is now being mixed in with what we just spent a lot of energy to source separate and to pick up and to have trucks to carry and process. And then we're going to mix it with the butts and the ashes that are creating the the fluorinated compounds that are toxic, along with diapers, along with pet waste, along with the long stream of phthalates. Green America has already published their report to say that thermal receipts, everyone receives receipts daily that are then tossed into the garbage can and then leached. They've shown that the leaching of those thermal receipts gets into the garbage in which the organics are there. And then we're gonna kind of stir this up, mix it up, shake it up, twist it, turn it, and separate out the organics. And I'm sorry to be so terse here, but it just isn't right. We're spending so much time and energy to source separate, like Europe. Europe has been through this. They already say source separated organics are the way to go. And yet we have one line in there that says, yeah, we'll keep them separate. But then you look deeper into the hairy details of the text, and you look and you find that they aren't actually being kept separate, that they're being mixed with the mixed garbage, the butts, the receipts, the diapers, the garbage. And why? What is the point? Then let's just stop source separating if that's what you're putting in, because it's a free country. It's a free world. We all have the right to throw it in the garbage and do what we want because we're free, right? But yet then, what are we going to do? It's all contaminated with fluorinated flame retardants. When you smoke the cigarettes, what do you think keeps those filters from burning up in your face? Something is keeping them from burning, and those contaminants are being then leached out into the liquid goop that gets into the food waste that stirs into the garbage can when the garbage truck comes and turns it over and dumps it into the trunk and then shakes it out and then twists it around and then separates it up into, whoa, is this stuff compost? In Europe, they call it compost-like output. It isn't really truly compost because true compost is made from source separated organics. That's where we started. That's what you said this was all about. But now you're doing this whole CEQA thing without being clear. It's ambiguous. What is it that you're proving and approving? Because I can't get it. What I see is unsourced separated organics because it's a free country, it's a free world. We all have the right to not do source separation. Thank you. I just think you need to be clearer and we need to save our children from all this contamination. And we need to keep the organics clean like Europe. And we need to follow the science. And I'll send it in. I'll send you what comes from Europe. And the proof is when you test what is made from unsourced separated organics turned into compost, unless you sieve in the solution to dilution, the solution to pollution is dilution. And is that why you're allowing source separated clean organics in there to just dilute out the mess that you've created? Thank you. I just think you need to do it the way you intended. And yeah, it's a free world, but our kids are getting this. And we're growing our food. This is for using on top of our ground, or is it just for fill again? You know, it's a free world, right? Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. Again, to reiterate for comments today, comments on the regulatory text should be made. We have another avenue for that process. A lot of comments on the regulatory text itself. The focus of the hearing today is for comments on the draft programmatic EIR, which was released on July 30th. So to the extent folks have comments on that, please submit those either in writing or make them here orally today, and we'll record those and enter that into the record. And we will provide written responses to comments that we received today. Thank you. Other comments in the room? There's no limit, Evan.
Evan Edgar, engineer for the California Compost Coalition. And this is under section 3.82 about greenhouse gases. As part of the NOP, I did provide comments about the scoping plan. And under regulatory setting, there's a discussion about all the different policy drivers and legislation that we're at today. As part of that, in a scoping plan, CARB has a definition for what is net zero greenhouse gas emissions for the waste sector. And it's in their May 15th, 2014 scoping plan. And the net zero is defined with metrics. And what the information I provide in writing, I will do again, is that these facilities, covered area static compost and anaerobic digestion facilities, are net zero now. With regards to the net emissions of processing and all the energy that goes into it, the net benefits of the offsets due to carbon sequestering are greater than that. So using the CARB definition and the federal EPA WARM model, and using verification from the climate registry as a third-party registration, we have shown that these facilities been net zero for some time now. That discussion is important. I've been involved with a lot of, recently the workshops have been about deep carbonization by 2045 and how to be carbon neutral by 2045 on how to get off the grid. And along the way, they're trying to phase out CNG and RNG trucks. So all these climate change policies of 2045 are getting in the way of greenhouse reductions today. Because right now we can take the RNG from anaerobic digestion. I wrote up the carbon metrics for that based upon your scenario, that in a transportation section being carbon negative and those benefits. So today we could actually be carbon negative, and we have shown to be net zero. Those type of metrics should be part of this plan today, because these facilities on a project level and on a program level are doing that. So in a greenhouse gas section, it'd be nice to have that discussion. I give it to you in Word, and that discussion is worthy because the AB 32 scoping plan from 2014 wanted the waste sector to be net zero by 2030. And the type of facilities that are on this report today in this program EIR are net zero now. And those metrics and math can back it up with a CARB definition. Please include them.
Thanks, Evan. Any comments online?
I have one that's probably on the reg fix.
Yeah, go ahead and read the comment.
All right, this is from Anna Haller with Director Project Development, Environmental Diversion Solutions. She commented, we embrace technologies like biochar gasification that reduce organic waste material volumes regionally or at the point of generation, while allowing us to combine organic waste with no worry of contamination, but also enhance compost and AD facilities. When will the qualification path for new technologies begin in order to obtain diversion compliance for under SB 1383? Closed loop franchised waste hauler transfer stations are on their way.
Thanks. And again, for comments to please focus on the environmental impact report, but I would just note that the regulations take effect in 2022. Other comments in the room on the environmental impact report? Okay, seeing no comments, we will hold it open for 5 minutes for additional comments coming in online. But we'll plan to close around 5 after or about 2:10 if there's no other comments. Okay, we have another comment. Just want to check that our recorder is ready.
Okay, thank you. Antoinette Stein, once again, PhD, Environmental Engineering, Air Quality Control. I just wanted to comment about the net zero all ready to go. Is in that evaluation, whether or not the organic digestate coming out of the anaerobic digesters, the qualifications of the trucking, where is that going? And are you including that into the equation? And is that going to be true organic compost, or is that compost-like output, or is it both? And if it's both, that there's qualifications for that. That's number one. Number two is on the side of the collected gases from the anaerobic digester. Are you including the energy and metrics to clean that so that you don't have the ammonia, the nitrics, the NOx that are equally as potent as the methane, that you're including that in the route of this net zero? Is it truly net zero? Where is that going, and what is that, where is that being deposited, along with the other toxins that are coming out of the anaerobic digester, including the sludge that goes to the water sewage system? Are all of those being calculated into the processing of that sludge, and where does it go, and what does it do? And because I don't really believe so. I think right now, as I pointed out, we have PFAS and PFOS that we have no source of dealing with, and we're ending up with it back into landfill. So it's really not truly, your diversion needs to be metrically counted, true diversion. Is it going to the landfill in the end after you extracted your energy? And is that truly a positive net zero or positive number? Or are we just comparing it to this bad decision of putting it in a landfill, making a mess, and now let's just do better? Is that where we were at? Or are we at truly net zero of what we're doing? So that's kind of the question. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. We'll take a closer look at that when we review all the comments that we've received in the public comment period. The EIR does cover a range of potential environmental impacts associated with managing material. Okay, Marcus, any more comments online? Okay, if there are no more comments in the room, then we are going to conclude the hearing for today. Appreciate folks coming here to provide comments. Do want to reiterate a couple things. The formal comment period on the environmental impact report will close on September 13th. For folks that are submitting letters as PDFs or mailing those in, we are also requesting that in order to help us make these documents accessible as part of the rulemaking record, and the EIR record, we're asking that you also provide those documents to us in electronic Word format that will help us make these documents accessible to meet existing ADA guidelines for state agencies. So with that, thank you again for folks that submitted comments. If you are participating online, any comments submitted from now until September 13th will be considered as part of the record and receive a formal written response when we consider all the comments cumulatively. Thank you again for those that have attended, and we're going to close out now.